Hey people, and welcome to another Killing Floor 2 SDK guide. In this episode I want to show you some basic principles of what can be called movement optimization. Things that you as a level designer can and probably should be doing to help your players more comfortably move around your map and not get stuck on strange parts of geometries. It's a really important aspect of level design, especially in a game like Killing Floor 2, where there's a lot of running and kiting, and the whole concept of stopping your movement can very quickly be very deadly, especially if you're playing on some higher difficulties. So what I want to show you is if we go into our map here, and it's a pretty big and roomy hallway, there's no problems just running straight ahead. We can even go over here, we can hug this wall, and nothing is preventing us from moving forward. Which is a good thing, right? Because if we're being chased by hordes of angry Zeds behind us, especially on higher difficulties, we don't want to stop movement, right? We don't want to suddenly stop and get caught and get cornered, and you're just gonna die if that happens. But if we go over here and we hug this wall and run straight ahead, we're going to bonk into this pillar, and it's going to completely stop our movement, which is a bad thing. We're gonna have a bad time when that happens. Now, you might say, well, that's kind of what you would expect if you're running straight ahead into like a corner like this. You would stop your movement, right? That makes sense. But when you think about it, it doesn't really make sense, because if this were real life, you don't run straight ahead like this all the time. If you come to an obstacle like this, you would turn your upper body, contort, sort of contort your hips and back, and slide past it without having to do what I'm doing here. Like, I have to turn the entire body of my character. In real life, you don't have to do that. You can easily be hugging a wall and just contorting your body to get around it and continue your forward movement. But because this is a computer game, we can't do that. And so even though you would expect to get stuck in it, it's not really making any sense. And in addition to that, it's just not really, it's just annoying. When you're playing the game, you don't want to worry about having to get stuck on stuff like this. It doesn't make any sense. It doesn't add anything to the experience. It doesn't really make it more realistic. It's just going to give you a bad day. So what can we do about stuff like this? That is where our movement optimization comes into place. So movement optimization is basically just wrapping things in blocking volumes. But obviously we have to shape the blocking volumes in a specific way. And that's what I want to show you how to do. And talk a little bit about when you should do it, when it's necessary, and when you can reliably don't have to worry about it. So let's get right into it, okay? We're going to do these two pillars very first. So what I'm doing is I'm going to pull up my builder brush. Right now it's hidden, so I'm going to hit the B on my keyboard. There it is. And instead of dragging it over here and placing it, I'm really just going to select my item that I want to wrap in my in a blocking volume, and I'm going to click this box up here, cube. That moves and centers my builder brush right on wherever the pivot is saved, which is down here. So I'm going to select my brush. I'm going to go into a snap of 8. Which is my preferred snap when doing blocking volumes. You don't have to use 8. You can use whatever you want. I just find that 8 is a very fitting size. I'm going to hit Shift 2 on my keyboard to bring my builder brush into edit mode. And I'm going to just move this up to the floor so that it's perpendicular with the floor here. I'm going to move it back out to the wall so that it aligns with the wall. And I'm going to drag it up to the ceiling here. Now I'm just going to select the faces, drag them in until I have pretty much my pillar completely wrapped inside of my brush, like so. Okay? And I've just gone back to, I've shut off the editing mode by hitting Shift 1. Shift 2 brings you to edit mode, Shift 1 brings you out of edit mode. Now I could add a blocking volume right now, but if I did that, then I wouldn't really have gotten anywhere, because I would still get stuck on this. So what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to go back into edit mode, and what I want to do is I want to grab these rear the rear part of my brush. I'm going to make sure that I'm in world mode, not local, because if we're in local, we get this annoying pivot that is going to be very difficult to work with. So I'm going to switch into world mode, and that makes it so much easier for me to edit the shape of my brush. I'm just going to pull these out. I'm going to do 1, 2, 3, 4. I'm going to go in here, grab the other one, and do the exact same thing. 1, 2, 3, 4. Right? That's looking pretty good. Now I'm going to go into here to volumes. I'm going to add a volume and make it a blocking volume. So I know it looks like nothing happened, but that's because my builder brush is actually sitting on top of the volume. So I can either move my brush, or I can just hit B on the keyboard to hide it. And now here is my blocking volume. If we build the geometry, we don't actually have to do that right now. We can just go into edit mode, play mode I mean, get into our map, and now watch what happens. I'm going to just hug the wall and run straight ahead. That's lovely, that's wonderful. See this? Not only is this really nice for your players, but the effect is so subtle that it actually looks like this is my character just realistically contorting himself to avoid getting stuck. It doesn't feel strange, it doesn't feel out of place. Even though there actually is an invisible barrier here, that's perfectly fine. As you're playing the game, nobody's ever going to notice it. They're not going to stop and think, oh, I can't get into this corner, that's really unrealistic, that's stupid. Nobody in their right mind would ever think that. And the difference is staggering. Right here, boom, I get stuck. If Zeds were chasing me, I'd be dead now. In here, no problem. This does not stop my movement. It slows me down ever so slightly, but that's kind of okay. So that's a very simple principle of how to do movement optimization. Now, instead of doing the same thing over here, I can just hold down my Alt key and drag and copy this, place this over here. And now this hallway is perfectly nice to be running in, and you don't have to worry about getting stuck. See, I'm not doing anything, I'm just clicking forward on my keyboard, and I get this nice unobstructed movement. So that's a principle of movement optimization. Let's go over here to the next part. Now, this is identical, except now we have some windows, and we have these pillars as well. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to grab these really quickly. I'm going to drag them over, copy them, and place them here, just to make sure that these are fixed as well. But let's go and look what we have on the opposite wall. Now we have some window frames here. And if you thought it was somewhat realistic to get stuck in a corner like this, what about this? Boom. That tiny little thing completely stops my movement, preventing me from doing anything in the forward momentum. Not only is this incredibly frustrating, it's completely unrealistic. This would never ever happen in real life. That is terrible. And it is something we absolutely do not want to happen in our map. So, same principle here. We can wrap this in a similar volume as this one, but with things such as window frames and even door frames, very small objects like these that only jut out very gently, we don't really have to wrap this in a blocking volume, especially not if we want players to actually be able to go through the window. So with an item like this, it's perfectly viable to just select them, open up the properties. We're going to scroll down here to the very bottom. There's something called collision, this one. We open that up, and under collision component, we change it from block all to block weapons. And that's all we really have to do. Now if we go back in here, we run along the wall again, we are no longer getting stuck, because we're passing right through. But because we've set it to block weapons, it still looks like it's a solid object. We can actually shoot it and our bullets will impact with it. So that was an easy fix, and it's a perfectly viable one. Cool. We're getting really good at this. No problem. Let's go to the next hallway, and this is the last one. Now in here we've got quite a few different things that we need to take care of. First of all, let's just go play this and see how it goes. So we've got our pillar. We haven't fixed this, but we can easily do that by just copy pasting. What about this wall? Let's run along this wall. Bonk. Something is blocking us. Can't possibly be that, can it? That's just the light on the wall. Why would we get stopped by it? It's barely even touching us. And yet, bonk, it completely stops our movement. We can duck under it, can we? Yes, we can duck under it. So we can't even crouch under it. No, we can't even duck under it. Wow, that's amazing. That is just terrible. And this one, that's basically the same as our pillars over here. This one also halts our movement. This one, well, it doesn't. Oh, yes, it does. It actually does bonk. Oh man, that's because this is a divot. It's set inside the wall, so we kind of sink into the geometry, and once we're in here, we bonk, hit the corner, and we stop. And then obviously this is, I mean, we don't even have to run along this, do we? This is obviously going to stop our movement. Boop, 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 bonk, bonk, donk, donk. Yeah, that's not good. So let's take a look at what we're going to do here. Now we can already pretty much tell how we fix this just based on what we've done already. The first thing we want to look at is this light. Just as with the window frames back here, there's no reason for us to create a blocking volume. We can just select these two items, bring up our properties, scroll down to collision and set it to block weapons. That's all we have to do. That takes care of that. And this, I've actually played a custom map that had a hallway with these exact lights spread all the way down the hallway, and they all had block all enabled. And you might even know what map I'm talking about. And it just, oh, it blew my mind. It was so annoying because it was a pretty narrow hallway, and you just don't expect to have to worry about getting stuck on geometry like this. So these kind of things are really important to pay attention to. With the with our bookshelf here, we can do the same thing. We can create a new volume. I'm just, we could just copy paste these and change the shape of them a bit, but just for good manner, I'm just going to create a new one just to show you again how it's done, or at least one way of doing it. I'm going to go back into edit mode. I'm going to do this really quickly. I'm going to adjust it to the walls, the floors, and the ceiling, like so. Have it pretty much. See, now right here there's one thing I want to touch upon, and this is another little trick you can use that's very handy. So this one is pretty much aligned with the front of it, but not entirely, as you can see, because this it's kind of jutting out of my blocking of my brush, and I'm not entirely sure how much of this I need to wrap inside of my volume in order to make sure that there's no part of it sticking out. And that's because I don't know what the collision on this one looks like. It might not be exactly accurate to the appearance of it. So what you can do is you can click Alt-C on your keyboard. What happens is it displays all of the collision models of everything in your map. I just disabled it and I'm enabling it. Alt-C will disable and enable collision modes, and these are the collision modes of all the meshes in your map. So I can now look at this and I can see that this collision it's sort of box shaped only around the core, and even though this drawer is sticking out, it doesn't have any collision. There's not actually any collision on it. If you really want to get technical with collision, you can also go into modes up here in the left corner, go into show collision modes and do rigid body. Now you get a very, very clear idea of what exactly is going on in your map, and this can be very helpful. See? So we can even see this bookshelf here, even though it has these jutting out drawers, they don't have any collision. So we only need to worry about this box here. I'm going to go back into my normal view mode. I'm going to bring up my builder brush again. And I'm pretty happy with this shape. It doesn't need to be 100%. This is perfectly okay. I'm just going to do the exact same thing as I did with the pillars before. I'm going to drag these out. Like so. And obviously the further you drag them out, the more smooth the movement becomes. I'm going to go into volumes, hit blocking volume, and that's perfectly fine. Now, how about this one here? Remember we sort of slid into this little crevice and then got stuck on these corners? In a situation like this, what I would do is, instead of creating, you know, volumes on each corner here, it is perfectly viable, and nobody's ever going to notice you've done this, to just sort of create an invisible wall. So I'm going to align this with the walls and drag it up. I'm going to get my top up here. It doesn't need to be any higher than this. Get this to the other corner here. And I'm just gonna adjust the thickness. It doesn't really matter about the thickness. And that's all I really need to do here. So I'm just gonna add a blocking volume here. And this is now effectively an invisible wall covering this up. Let's go play this. And we can now see this light no longer stops our movement. And this one allows us to run right into it. And we're just gonna bounce off it. And this one no longer stops our movement either. Now, we're not going to, as you can see, we don't fall into this little crevice anymore. But in terms of actual gameplay, when you're playing the map and running around, nobody's going to notice that, oh, I should be, you know, I should be going into this. Why can't I go in here? There's an invisible wall here. You know, that's fine. It doesn't bring anything to the game. It doesn't immerse you more into the map just because you move these 8 units inside of this. So in a situation like this, it's perfectly okay to just create an invisible wall. The last thing we want to do is just wrap this one, because this one also had some annoying blockage, as it were. But we are going to do something a bit more technical here to get this working. So I'm going to bring in my brush. I'm going to align it with the floor first of all. And I want to align it to the back wall here. Like so. Now I want to drag this to get pretty much... Again, I'm going to hit Alt-C to get an idea of what the... See, this corner here is actually jutting out. So I'm starting to think, how can I do this? Well, if this were me, and it is, I'd do this. I'd make sure that I get this one in a good angle, like so. And what I'm going to do next is I'm going to go into my brush. I'm going to hit this bottom line. I could pick the top one. It doesn't matter, the bottom or the top. And I'm going to click this button here, split. So now it gave me some more vertices on my builder brush to work with. I'm going to actually select this one. And I'm going to, let's go into our collision mode here. I'm going to drag this out and sideways to right about there. I'm going to say that looks pretty good. I'm going to continue working on the sides here, and I want to get to the edge of this barrel over here. And now I want to drag this corner in to pretty much just be a little bit outside of that one. And this is already looking really promising. Last thing I want to do is I want to grab the back one here. And I want to do this. And I'm going to do the basic same thing over here. Dragging this out here. I think that's going to be okay. And now I want to get this one to the ceiling. And as we can see, this is split into 2 pieces. So I could hold down control and do it like this and now drag these up. That'll be a viable way of doing it. But there is an even better way. is I'm just going to select the entire thing. I'm going to deselect it and reselect it. And I'm going to hit this button here, Optimize. And what that does is, as you can see, the engine now determines the split that I had made back here was no longer necessary, so it got deleted. If I undo, we can easily see, and I can redo, undo, and redo. This reduces the number of vertices on my volume, and that's in itself a small optimization. It also makes it a bit easier to work with. You can't always do this. You can always click the Optimize button on your volumes, but you might not always see a result. It kind of depends on the shape of your volume and on how the SDK determines whether or not there is any optimization to be made. So if you are unsure, just try it, and if nothing happens, you're just going to have to go, well, okay, fair enough. I can't optimize this volume, and that's okay. It's not something you have to sort of pay a huge amount of attention to. It's just a nice little thing that you sometimes are able to do. So my volume is pretty good here. Did I add one? No. I'm just going to add a blocking volume. Hide my brush. And when we go into the game now and check out this stack, we should be able to run. So it's a bit slow. As you can see, it's a bit slow. But otherwise, this is pretty good. And again, you might say there's a big, huge gap here with an invisible wall, but there's no gameplay advantage to going in there, right? Why would you be in there anyway? So if it's not necessary for players to be able to go in there, don't worry about having some invisible walls. It's better to have these sort of places that might not make so much sense, but that actually help your players move around the map more comfortably. And if you really want to be pedantic about it and say, well, there's an invisible wall there, I don't like it, you could just do something like this. Put a barrel here, and now it makes, now players would go in here and they would bump into this invisible wall and they'd say, okay, well, that makes sense because there is actually something there blocking me. This one was a bit slow at sort of jutting us around it, wasn't it? So again, like I said, the more you drag this out, the more easily you will be able to move past it. But again, you do also make it more obvious that there actually is an invisible barrier here. So this is pretty much personal preference, how much you want to cover up or fill up these gaps with stuff. In my opinion, you don't really need to. Something like this is perfectly okay. And so that's basically it, guys. That's all I really wanted to show you. Like I said, this is a very basic look into how you can optimize movement in your map for your players, but certainly also for your Zeds. I mean, the AI will also benefit slightly from stuff like this. I mean, a lamp like this could potentially block a Zed, make it do weird movement. So it does primarily benefit your players, but also in some cases the AI will benefit from it as well. That's all I really have to show you in this video. I hope you found it useful, and I hope it helps you better understand some of the sort of subtle details that you as a level designer can and in many cases should be doing. It's a kind of a thankless job doing this because all of this is invisible to the player. Most players will not have a single clue that you've put in time and effort to do this because they can't see it. All of this is invisible in game. But when they're playing your map, even though they won't notice that you've done this, they will notice if you don't do it. Because if you don't do this kind of stuff, players are going to get stuck. And they might not know why they get stuck, but there's not going to be any doubt in their mind that they did get stuck, and they might have died in a game for it. And when that stuff happens, they get annoyed for good reason. And they're going to think that your map is, oh, this is such a bad map, I get stuck everywhere. Even though your map might be really good in terms of visuals and design and layout, if players get stuck and die on it, they're going to hate the map anyway. So these are the kind of things, these are little fan services that you as a level designer can do that your players are probably not going to thank you for it. They're not going to say, oh man, your map is so cool and I love how you've done a lot of movement optimization. I don't get stuck on your map. It's so wonderful. Nobody's going to say that. But if you don't do it and people do get stuck, they will call you out on calling your map shit because they get stuck everywhere. I hope you get what I mean, and I hope you found this useful. So go do some mapping, and I'll see you around. Take care, and goodbye.